What happens when the richest billionaire in the region loses control because of the Maid? Hey everyone, welcome back to Stories TH. I'm so glad you're here today because we've got an amazing millionaire story lined up that might just surprise you. And hey, a little warning, some parts might make you want to check your own bank account twice. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Stories TH so you never miss these inspiring journeys. Oh, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far and wide our community reaches. So get comfy, maybe grab a cup of your favorite drink, and let's relax as we explore the twists and turns of this incredible story. Ready? Let's jump right in. Jonathan Pierce was a name that echoed throughout Silicon Valley like the reverberation of a booming earthquake. At 56, he was not only the richest man in the region, but one of the most influential billionaires in the tech world. His empire spanned cutting-edge software companies, sprawling real estate developments, and countless investments that had only increased his vast fortune over the decades. With a net worth estimated at over $10 billion, Jonathan was the epitome of power and control, living a life most could only dream of: luxury cars, private jets, sprawling mansions, and an unchallenged dominance in the business arena. His influence was not confined to mere wealth. Jonathan's decisions affected markets, shaped industries, and even shifted political dynamics in California and beyond. Many respected him, some feared him, and a select few envied him. But one thing was clear: Jonathan Pierce was a man who had everything, or at least he thought he did. From the outside, his life looked flawless. His primary residence sat atop the rolling hills of San Francisco, overlooking the glittering cityscape below. The mansion was a modern architectural masterpiece with floor-to-ceiling windows, an infinity pool, and smart home technology that anticipated his every need. Every morning, the house woke him gently with soft lighting and the subtle aroma of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen. His calendar was meticulously managed by a team of personal assistants who ensured every meeting and appointment was flawlessly scheduled, leaving no room for error. Yet, beneath this polished exterior was a man driven by an insatiable hunger for control. Jonathan believed that with enough planning, enough surveillance, and enough power, he could manage every aspect of his life and the lives of those around him. He trusted very few P7 people and demanded absolute loyalty from those who worked for him. In his world, trust was currency more precious than money. His business empire was built on this principle. Jonathan was famously ruthless during negotiations, often using his intuition and strategic mind to outmaneuver competitors. Many deals that seemed impossible were suddenly within reach when he entered the room. He thrived on being the one who held the reins, and this mindset extended beyond the boardroom into his personal life. His family, though distant at times, lived under his exacting standards. His wife, Victoria, was elegant and poised, but had gradually retreated into the background of his bustling life. His two children were adults now, carving their own paths, but always tethered to the family legacy. Jonathan's relationships were largely transactional. Loyalty was expected, but emotional vulnerability was a weakness he refused to show. Despite all this, Jonathan was not without his own demons. Years of building an empire had left him isolated. Friendships were scarce, and trust was a rarity. The few close relationships he had were guarded tightly, and even then, he often felt a gnawing suspicion that those around him might one day betray him. And so, Jonathan's world revolved around one central axis: control. Into this meticulously ordered life came Emily Chen. At 29, Emily was far from the typical help Jonathan was accustomed to. She was hired as a personal assistant turned maid initially, no more than a background figure in the Pierce household. Her origins were modest. Born and raised in San Francisco's Chinatown, Emily's quiet demeanor and unassuming presence made her easy to overlook. But Emily was far from ordinary. Beneath her calm exterior was a mind sharp as a tack and a heart that harbored secrets Jonathan could never imagine. She had studied carefully, learned about the Pierce family's routines, weaknesses, and most importantly, their secrets. She had entered the Pierce household not by chance, but by design. Jonathan barely noticed her at first. Like many before her, Emily was just part of the staff, efficient, discreet, and unobtrusive. She managed his schedule flawlessly, handled the smallest details with care, and maintained the mansion with an almost obsessive precision. Her presence was a quiet constant, blending into the background as she moved through the luxurious rooms. Yet, over time, small anomalies began to surface. Files went missing from his office, emails were mysteriously deleted, and minor malfunctions started to affect his state-of-the-art security system. Jonathan's instincts, finely tuned over decades of business battles, picked up on these irregularities. But the idea that the source of disruption could be someone inside his own home was inconceivable. After all, how could the unassuming Maid be the architect of such chaos? Jonathan's grip on his world began to show signs of slipping. The first cracks appeared in the form of minor delays in his projects, strange miscommunications with his executive team, and a growing sense that he was no longer the one in control. These disruptions unsettled him deeply. He was a man used to dictating terms and steering outcomes. Losing control was an alien sensation, one that made his blood run cold. Every decision he made now seemed shadowed by uncertainty. Meetings that once ended with his firm nod now ended with hesitation. Negotiations that previously swung in his favor became protracted and fraught with unexpected obstacles. Jonathan was used to being the puppet master, but now the strings seemed tangled and someone else was pulling them. And yet, as the disturbances intensified, Jonathan remained blind to the true source. His suspicion hovered around external enemies, rival companies, or even disgruntled employees within his vast corporation. But Emily? She was invisible in his mind, a mere shadow in the corners of his carefully maintained universe. The mansion's sleek hallways and marble floors were witness to a silent war waging beneath the surface, one that Jonathan had yet to recognize fully. For Jonathan Pierce, the richest man in Silicon Valley, life was about to take a turn he never anticipated. The very foundations of his power would be shaken by someone he never saw coming, the quiet maid, Emily Chen. In his quest for total control, Jonathan had underestimated the subtlety of influence and the power of invisibility. The game had changed, and Jonathan Pierce was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Even the mightiest can fall when they lose sight of the small things, because sometimes the smallest players hold the greatest power. Emily Chen had always understood the art of invisibility. Born and raised in San Francisco's bustling Chinatown neighborhood, she learned early on how to move through crowded streets unnoticed, how to blend into a sea of faces, and how to listen without being heard. At 29, she was the new maid in the Pierce household, a position that placed her at the heart of Silicon Valley's most powerful family. Yet, beneath her calm and efficient exterior lay a world of secrets and motives that no one could guess. From the moment she arrived at the sprawling mansion perched atop the hills overlooking the city, Emily had been acutely aware of the power dynamics at play. The house was a monument to wealth and control. High-tech security cameras monitored every corner. An army of staff members ensured every detail was perfect, and the air itself seemed charged with the unspoken tension of absolute authority. Emily's role was simple on the surface: keep the household running smoothly, anticipate the needs of the family, and remain discreet. But for her, this job was a calculated entry point into a world that had long been closed to people like her. She knew that to get closer to Jonathan Pierce, the man who seemed to own everything she had, to play her part perfectly. On her first day, she arrived quietly, carrying only a small suitcase and a modest lunch packed by her mother. She was greeted by the head housekeeper, a stern woman named Margaret, who wasted no time in briefing Emily on her duties. The mansion's strict rules and regimented schedule were laid out clearly: no personal distractions, no fraternizing with the family beyond what was necessary, and absolute loyalty to the household. Emily nodded, masking the storm of thoughts inside her mind. She was here for one reason, and one reason only: to execute a plan that had been years in the making. Her background was far from the polished corridors of wealth she now walked through daily. Raised by a single mother in a cramped apartment, Emily had witnessed firsthand the crushing weight of financial hardship. Her father, a once promising entrepreneur, had been ruined by none other than Jonathan Pierce's cutthroat business tactics. That loss shattered her family, forcing them into a life of struggle and uncertainty. That chapter of her life became the fuel for her mission. Emily was determined to make Jonathan pay not with violence or open confrontation, but with subtlety, precision, and patience. She understood the power of quiet influence and knew that the best way to undermine a giant was from within. At first, Emily played the role perfectly. She was polite, efficient, and respectful, never drawing attention to herself. She quickly learned the family's schedules, preferences, and vulnerabilities. She studied Jonathan's habits, his early morning routine, his favorite drinks, the way he signed documents, even the tone of voice he used with his assistants. She also paid close attention to the household's internal dynamics. The family members, the staff, the business associates who came and went, it was a web of relationships, loyalties, and rivalries that Emily was determined to untangle. What made Emily unique was her ability to listen without judgment and observe without interference. People often spoke freely around her, assuming she was just a background figure. This gave her access to secrets and information that even Jonathan's closest advisors might not know. But Emily wasn't just gathering intel for the sake of it. Every piece of information was a puzzle piece in her larger strategy. She noticed how Jonathan's trust was heavily placed in a few key executives who controlled the flow of information and decisions. If she could disrupt those channels subtly, she could create confusion and mistrust. She also learned about the family's private struggles, arguments hidden behind closed doors, financial decisions made without full consensus, and personal weaknesses that could be exploited. One afternoon, while cleaning Jonathan's home office, Emily discovered a small flaw in the digital security system, a vulnerability that, with the right tools, could allow her limited access to sensitive files. It was a discovery that excited her, but she was careful not to act hastily. Instead, she patiently waited for the right moment to make her move. Despite her calculated demeanor, Emily was not without moments of doubt. There were nights when she lay awake, wrestling with the morality of her plan. She questioned whether revenge was worth the potential destruction it could cause not just to Jonathan, but to innocent people caught in the crossfire. Yet, she reminded herself of the injustice her family had suffered. The memory of her father's downfall at Jonathan's hands was a scar that would never fade. She believed that exposing Jonathan's vulnerabilities was a form of justice, a way to balance the scales. In her interactions with the family, Emily maintained a facade of loyalty and discretion. She was careful never to reveal too much of herself, and she cultivated an image of quiet dependability. Jonathan, for his part, barely noticed her presence beyond the occasional nod or brief exchange of pleasantries. He was consumed by his empire, often preoccupied with high-stakes meetings and global deals. To him, Emily was just another cog in the vast machine of his household staff. This underestimation was exactly what Emily needed. Over the following weeks, small incidents began to surface, files misplaced, meeting schedules subtly altered, and minor technical glitches in Jonathan's secure systems. These disturbances were enough to create ripples of confusion, but were never traced back to her. Her ability to manipulate these details without detection showcased her growing confidence and the effectiveness of her plan. Emily also formed quiet alliances with some of the other staff members, those who felt overlooked or underappreciated. Through subtle encouragement and shared grievances, she built a network of informal support within the mansion. This network was crucial not just for gathering information, but for shaping the environment in ways that would eventually destabilize Jonathan's control. Behind the scenes, Emily's days were filled with careful calculations and covert actions. She worked tirelessly to balance her duties with the delicate art of sabotage. She was fully aware that any misstep could cost her everything. Losing her job would mean losing her chance to penetrate Jonathan's world and potentially expose her true intentions. Yet, every time she moved a piece on the chessboard, Emily felt a surge of purpose. She was no longer the powerless girl from Chinatown. She was a force to be reckoned with, quietly upending the life of the richest man in Silicon Valley. Emily's presence in the Pierce household was the calm before the storm. Jonathan Pierce's reign of control was about to face its most significant challenge, not from a rival billionaire or a corporate competitor, but from the quiet maid who had entered his world unnoticed. Her story was only just beginning. Strange incidents began to ripple through Jonathan Pierce's carefully curated world, subtle at first, but increasingly impossible to ignore. What was once the flawless precision of his daily operations now seemed peppered with inexplicable glitches. It started with the security system, an intricate network of cameras, motion sensors, and biometric locks that had protected his mansion and offices for years. One morning, a crucial camera feed went dark for a full 10 minutes during a high-profile board meeting in his home office. The glitch was brief, but unsettling. Jonathan's personal assistants tried to dismiss it as a technical hiccup, but the timing was suspicious. The meeting involved negotiations with one of Jonathan's biggest international partners, and the blackout coincided perfectly with the discussion of a sensitive contract clause. Not long after, Jonathan's executive team noticed a critical document had mysteriously vanished from the company's secure server. The document was vital, a contract outlining the terms of a multi-billion-dollar deal with a leading tech firm in Asia. Losing it threatened to derail the entire project, potentially costing millions in damages and reputation. Jonathan was disturbed. His empire was built on precision and information, and losing control of either was unacceptable. He summoned his top IT specialists, demanding a full audit of the system. Hours turned into days as cybersecurity experts scoured every line of code and server log. The verdict was chilling. No external hacker had breached the system. The disturbances originated from inside, from someone with physical access. This realization hit Jonathan harder than any external threat. The enemy was within his walls. The mysterious erasure of digital files was just the beginning. Subtle shifts began to appear in the communication between Jonathan and his executives. Emails went unanswered, meeting schedules suddenly conflicted, and crucial phone calls were missed without explanation. Small details, each seemingly insignificant on its own, combined to form a pattern of disruption. Even his personal life was not spared. Invitations to charity galas were sent to incorrect addresses, his favorite wine shipments arrived spoiled, and family dinners were delayed or canceled last minute. Jonathan's sense of order was unraveling, and it terrified him. What gnawed at him most was the growing suspicion that the disruption stemmed from someone close, someone he trusted, or at least believed he did. Jonathan launched a covert internal investigation, engaging private detectives and trusted advisors to scrutinize his household staff and inner circle. But every lead ended in dead ends or inconclusive results. The very walls of his mansion seemed to conspire against him, shielding the source of the chaos. Amidst this turmoil, Emily Chen continued to move unnoticed, her calm demeanor unchanged. She had learned the rhythm of the household so well that her actions blended seamlessly into the background. To Jonathan, she remained just the quiet maid present, but invisible. However, Emily was not content with minor disruptions alone. Her plan demanded more than glitches and lost documents. She needed to shake Jonathan's confidence at its core. One evening, during a lavish company dinner hosted at the Pierce estate, the household's pristine image was shattered. The event was meant to showcase Jonathan's latest business venture, a cutting-edge renewable energy startup that promised to revolutionize the industry. The guest list included prominent investors, media figures, and key industry players. Just as Jonathan began his keynote speech, the mansion was plunged into darkness. The entire estate lost power, the grand chandelier went out, and murmurs of confusion spread through the crowd. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows on the faces of the guests. The blackout lasted for nearly 15 minutes, long enough to ignite rumors and suspicion. Jonathan's security team scrambled to restore order, but the damage was done. The event's momentum faltered, and the carefully orchestrated image of invincibility was cracked. Behind the scenes, Jonathan was furious and shaken. The blackout was no accident. It was sabotage. His investigators traced the power failure to an internal circuit breaker, deliberately triggered to cut the main supply. This was a bold move, one that carried significant risk and revealed an enemy willing to escalate the conflict. Moreover, the blackout was just the beginning of the fallout. Within hours, sensitive information from the company's internal emails was leaked to the press. Confidential financial projections, private negotiations, and even personal emails between Jonathan and his family were splashed across headlines. The media frenzy was brutal. Questions about Jonathan's leadership surfaced, stock prices began to fall, and investors grew jittery. Jonathan watched helplessly as the empire he had built over decades seemed to crumble overnight. Despite the chaos, Jonathan refused to give in. He doubled down on his efforts to identify the culprit and restore order. But as every day passed, the disruptions grew more sophisticated and targeted. Meanwhile, Emily's strategy was unfolding flawlessly. She had exploited vulnerabilities in the household and corporate infrastructure, turning Jonathan's trusted environment into a minefield of uncertainty. She had allies among the staff, disgruntled employees who resented the billionaire's iron grip and were eager to see cracks form in the facade. Through whispered conversations and subtle manipulations, Emily had sown seeds of distrust and discord. Her ability to blend kindness with cunning made her indispensable yet dangerous. To the family and staff, she was a reliable and empathetic presence. To Jonathan, she was the embodiment of efficiency. But beneath that veneer, she was orchestrating a symphony of controlled chaos. Jonathan's frustration grew as he realized that his usual tactics, pressure, intimidation, and swift action were ineffective. His empire's defenses were designed to keep out external threats, not to root out a silent adversary within. He began to feel the creeping paranoia of a man losing his grip. Every glance from a staff member felt loaded with suspicion, every unexplained absence a potential betrayal. Yet, even as his world unraveled, Jonathan remained determined. Losing was not an option. He was a man forged in battles of power and influence. He would fight back with everything he had. And yet, the question lingered in his mind: who was the enemy inside his walls? The strange incidents were no longer isolated events. They were a clear message. Jonathan Pierce's control was slipping, and someone was pulling the strings. He could only guess how far the disruption would go and how much damage it would ultimately cause. Jonathan Pierce sat alone in his sprawling home office late into the night, staring at the glowing screens that once symbolized his unshakable control. The soft hum of computers filled the air, but the sense of order they once brought was gone. Instead, what Jonathan felt was a growing void, a loss of control he couldn't ignore. Every thread of power he'd spent a lifetime weaving now felt frayed, slipping through his fingers. The incidents were no longer mere glitches. They were a calculated assault on his authority. His carefully constructed world, built on precision and dominance, was unraveling piece by piece. The man who once dictated terms with absolute certainty now found himself second-guessing every decision, every conversation, every move. His phone buzzed again. It was Victoria, his wife. They rarely spoke in these late hours, their relationship strained by years of ambition and distance. Tonight was different. Her voice trembled when she said, "Jonathan, things are falling apart. The board is worried. The media is relentless. Even the family is uneasy." Jonathan's jaw tightened. The family dinners had become battlegrounds, tense and filled with unspoken accusations. His children had started to pull away, their loyalty shaken by rumors and doubt. The empire that was supposed to unite them was now driving a wedge between them. But what scared Jonathan most was the creeping feeling that he was no longer the one steering the ship. His instinct for control, a trait that had brought him to the pinnacle of success, was slipping away, replaced by uncertainty and vulnerability. He had always believed that power was absolute, that money and influence could solve any problem. But now, the cracks in his empire revealed a harsh truth. Control was fragile, and even the richest man could lose it if he wasn't vigilant. Jonathan leaned back in his leather chair, closing his eyes. Memories flooded his mind, the early days of his career when every deal was a battle, every victory a hard-fought conquest. He had faced rivals, market crashes, betrayals. Yet nothing had prepared him for this internal erosion. The disturbances were coming from within. The enemy was someone he had allowed into his home, someone he had underestimated, Emily Chen. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. How could the quiet maid have such a profound impact? How had he missed the signs for so long? Jonathan reviewed the reports from his private investigators. Emily's background was unremarkable, no criminal record, no overt connections to competitors. She was a ghost in the mansion, visible yet invisible. But the pieces were coming together. The glitches in the security system, the missing files, the blackout during the company dinner, all pointed to someone with intimate access. He was being undermined from the inside, and the hand guiding the chaos belonged to Emily. His first reaction was disbelief. How could a single employee wield such power over a billionaire's empire? It was a blow to his ego, a direct challenge to his belief in absolute control. But Jonathan was no stranger to adversity. He was a man who thrived on challenges, who had built his fortune by overcoming obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Losing control was not an option. He summoned his closest advisors and security team for an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was tense, charged with urgency and unease. Jonathan laid out the situation with brutal honesty, a rare moment of vulnerability. "We're facing a threat from inside," he said. "Someone is sabotaging us. I want every resource focused on identifying and neutralizing this threat. No stone unturned." The team nodded, aware of the stakes. The company's reputation, the family's legacy, everything depended on regaining control. Jonathan also realized that brute force and intimidation wouldn't work this time. The threat was subtle, embedded in trust and routine. He needed a different approach, one that combined technology, psychology, and strategy. He ordered a complete overhaul of the household security systems, introducing biometric scanners, encrypted communications, and real-time monitoring. But he also knew that technology alone couldn't solve the problem. He needed to understand Emily, not just her actions, but her motives. Jonathan began to dig into her past, hiring private investigators to trace her history, connections, and possible vulnerabilities. What he found was a woman shaped by hardship and determination, with a personal vendetta rooted in old wounds. The discovery was unsettling, but also illuminating. Emily was no ordinary employee. She was a calculated adversary who had infiltrated his world with precision. Jonathan felt a grudging respect for her cunning, but remained resolute in his mission to reclaim his empire. In the weeks that followed, Jonathan's life became a balancing act between public appearances and private battles. He continued to project strength in the boardroom and at social events, but behind closed doors, he fought to restore order. The pressure was immense. His company's stock fluctuated, his board questioned his leadership, and the media speculated wildly about the turmoil behind the scenes. Even his closest friends advised caution, warning him not to underestimate the quiet forces at play. Yet Jonathan was determined. He knew that the path to regaining control required patience, insight, and calculated risk. One evening, as he reviewed surveillance footage with his security team, Jonathan noticed something new, a subtle pattern of movements and interactions that had previously gone unnoticed. Emily was not acting alone. There were moments when she communicated discreetly with other staff members, exchanging brief glances or passing notes under the guise of routine tasks. Jonathan realized that the sabotage was a coordinated effort, involving a network within his own household. The betrayal cut deep. The walls he had built to protect his world were porous, leaking trust and security. But with this knowledge came opportunity. Jonathan began to devise a counter-strategy, one that involved turning the tables, using deception and infiltration to identify the conspirators and dismantle their plans. He started by planting misinformation, creating false leads and decoys to flush out those involved. At the same time, he intensified his scrutiny of Emily, watching her every move, listening for inconsistencies, and probing for weaknesses. Jonathan's struggle was no longer just about protecting assets. It was a battle for his identity and legacy. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and controlled markets was now locked in a silent war within his own home. But Jonathan Pierce was nothing if not resilient. He reminded himself that control was not about perfection, but adaptability. Losing grip was a challenge to be met, not a defeat to accept. As he prepared for the next phase of this high-stakes game, Jonathan knew one thing for certain. He would not let the smallest player dictate the fate of his empire. The fight for control had only just begun. I still remember the day I first stepped into the Pierce estate. The sheer scale of the place was overwhelming. The gleaming marble floors, the towering glass windows that revealed breathtaking views of San Francisco Bay, and the subtle hum of technology that seemed to pulse through the walls. For a girl like me, raised in the cramped quarters of Chinatown, this was a different world, one defined by opulence and cold precision. My name is Emily Chen. I was 29 when I accepted the job as a maid for Jonathan Pierce, the richest man in Silicon Valley. To most, I was just another face in the staff roster, quiet, efficient, invisible. But beneath that calm exterior, I carried a storm of memories, a burning desire for justice, and a plan carefully crafted over years. Growing up, my family was not unlike many others in our neighborhood, hardworking but struggling. My father was a small-time entrepreneur with dreams as big as Jonathan Pierce's. For years, he ran a modest tech startup, hopeful that one day he'd break through the glass ceiling of Silicon Valley. But dreams can be fragile. When Jonathan Pierce's empire began expanding, my father's company found itself squeezed out, swallowed by aggressive acquisitions and hostile takeovers. Jonathan's business tactics were ruthless, and the consequences were devastating for us. My father lost everything: his company, our savings, and ultimately, his hope. I was just a teenager then, but the memory of those days is etched in my mind. Watching my family unravel, feeling the weight of injustice settle over us, that pain shaped who I became. I vowed to reclaim what was lost, not just for my family, but for all those crushed under the boot of power. When the opportunity to work at the Pierce household arose, I saw it as a chance away inside the fortress. I knew I couldn't challenge Jonathan head-on; that would be suicide. But from within, I could weave a different kind of influence, one that could chip away at his empire from the shadows. My first days in the mansion were a whirlwind of learning and adaptation. I observed everything: the schedules, the habits, the subtle tensions between family members and staff. I listened carefully, catching whispered conversations and catching glimpses of cracks beneath the polished surface. To everyone, I was the perfect employee: polite, diligent, and unassuming. I made sure the household ran smoothly, anticipating needs before they were voiced. I handled everything with a grace that earned me trust and lowered suspicion. But beneath that mask, I was gathering pieces of a puzzle pieces I intended to use to turn the tables. One of my early discoveries was the vulnerability in the mansion's security system. During routine cleaning of Jonathan's office, I noticed inconsistencies in the digital logs and realized that with subtle manipulation, I could create small disturbances. Files disappearing here, camera feeds glitching there enough to unsettle without raising alarms. I took care not to rush. Every action was calculated. I needed Jonathan to question his own control, to feel the unease that comes from knowing something is wrong but not knowing what. At times, I wrestled with doubt. Was I justified in this covert campaign? Would the fallout hurt innocent people? But then I reminded myself of my father's downfall and the countless others who suffered silently. I was not acting out of malice, but out of a desperate need for justice. My position gave me access to more than just the mansion. Over time, I built quiet alliances with other staff members, people overlooked and underappreciated, sharing a subtle dissatisfaction with the household's strict hierarchy. Through whispered conversations and small favors, I created a network that could aid my plans. Each connection was a thread in the web I was weaving, a web designed to ensnare Jonathan's empire. One of my proudest moments came when I managed to orchestrate the blackout during Jonathan's company dinner, a bold move that sent shockwaves through his carefully constructed world. It required precise timing, knowledge of the electrical system, and the trust of some staff who didn't question my intentions. Watching the faces of the guests as the lights went out, the confusion, the whispered fears was both thrilling and terrifying. I knew the event would be dissected by media and investors alike, shaking confidence in Jonathan's leadership. But it was more than just a power play. It was a message: the mighty can fall, and the untouchable are not invincible. Still, even as I advanced my plan, I felt the weight of the consequences. I wasn't blind to the chaos that rippled beyond Jonathan to his family, his employees, and the innocent caught in the crossfire. At night, I lay awake thinking about the cost of vengeance. Yet I reminded myself that the system had to be challenged. Power concentrated in one man's hands without accountability breeds injustice. I wasn't just a maid, I was a catalyst for change. Living within the Pierce household taught me lessons beyond strategy and subterfuge. I saw the loneliness of wealth, the isolation of power, and the fragility of control. Jonathan Pierce was not a villain in the traditional sense. He was a man shaped by his own fears and ambitions, flawed but formidable. There were moments I sympathized with him, glimpses of the man behind the empire. But sympathy didn't erase the need for justice. My greatest challenge was balancing my role in the household with the secret war I was waging. I had to be perfect, flawless in my duties, invisible in my intentions. A single mistake could end everything. Yet, every day I grew more confident. I had become a master of subtlety, turning small disruptions into powerful ripples. I learned to listen, not just to words, but to silences, to read between lines and see through facades. The Pierce household was a chessboard, and I was playing the long game. Each move brought me closer to my goal, but the path was fraught with risk. Sometimes, I wondered what Jonathan would think if he truly knew me, not just as his maid, but as the architect of his unraveling. Would he see the pain behind my actions? Would he understand the price of his own ambitions? Or would he see only an enemy? In the quiet moments, I reminded myself that power without empathy is hollow. Perhaps, in the end, our fates were intertwined not just as adversaries, but as reflections of a world where control and vulnerability coexist. My story is not just about revenge, it's about reclaiming dignity in a world that often strips it away. As I move forward, I carry the weight of my past and the hope for a future where justice is more than just a word whispered in shadows. The smile Emily wore was like a perfectly polished mask, warm, approachable, and disarmingly genuine. But beneath that smile lay a calculated mind, methodically orchestrating her plan to dismantle Jonathan Pierce's empire from the inside. For years, she had harbored a burning grudge against him, a grudge rooted deep in the shadows of her family's past. It was no accident that she had ended up in the Pierce household. Emily's true agenda stretched far beyond household chores and scheduling appointments. She was there to avenge her father, a man whose dreams and livelihood had been crushed under Jonathan's ruthless business tactics. Jonathan Pierce had built his empire through aggressive takeovers and cutthroat negotiations. When Emily's father, Michael Chen, attempted to grow his startup into a promising competitor, Jonathan's relentless business machine targeted it mercilessly. He orchestrated hostile bids, spread damaging rumors, and ultimately forced Michael's company into bankruptcy. The consequences rippled through Emily's family. They lost their home, their savings, and their sense of security. Michael Chen, once a proud entrepreneur, spiraled into despair. Emily witnessed firsthand how Jonathan's empire had destroyed her father's life, and by extension, hers. From that point on, Emily vowed to take control back, not by direct confrontation, but by infiltrating the very heart of the Pierce dynasty. She meticulously mapped out a plan to undermine Jonathan's control, using the skills she had honed over years of quiet observation and careful calculation. The first step was gaining access to the Pierce mansion. She presented herself as an ideal candidate, efficient, discreet, and unassuming. Her background in business administration and computer skills gave her the edge she needed to maneuver within the household and eventually access sensitive information. Once inside, Emily began to subtly manipulate the environment. She targeted Jonathan's digital security, planting small glitches that would seem like technical faults but would chip away at his confidence. She arranged for key documents to be misplaced or altered slightly, enough to create doubt and confusion among his executive team. But Emily's plan was more than just sabotage, it was psychological warfare. She sought to erode Jonathan's trust in those around him, including his closest advisors and even his family. She fed whispers of doubt through carefully positioned conversations, fueling paranoia that slowly consumed him. Emily understood that the most effective attacks were invisible, carried out in the spaces where trust was supposed to be strongest. By turning Jonathan's inner circle against him, she was isolating him, weakening the foundation of his power. One of her most daring moves was orchestrating the blackout during Jonathan's company dinner. Using her knowledge of the mansion's electrical systems, and with the silent cooperation of a few trusted staff, Emily plunged the estate into darkness at the most inopportune moment. The blackout was a masterstroke. It not only embarrassed Jonathan in front of his influential guests, but also sent a clear signal. His control was no longer absolute. The subsequent leak of confidential information amplified the damage, shaking investor confidence and tarnishing his reputation. Despite the risks, Emily never wavered. Each move was calculated, each consequence anticipated. But beneath her resolve, there was a current of doubt and complexity. Emily was not a villain in the traditional sense. She was driven by a profound sense of injustice, shaped by personal loss and a desire for retribution. Yet, as she advanced her plan, she grappled with the moral weight of her actions. She questioned whether the collateral damage, the fractured family relationships, the turmoil within the company was justified. Was her vengeance truly a path to justice, or was she becoming the very force of destruction she despised? These internal conflicts humanized her, making her more than just an agent of chaos. She was a woman caught between the desire for payback and the cost it exacted on those around her. Emily also recognized the duality of power, the way it could corrupt, but also protect, how control was both a weapon and a shield. In Jonathan, she saw a man shaped by the very system that had shaped her, both prisoners of a world where strength was measured in influence and money. Their conflict was more than a personal feud. It was a clash of worlds and values, a microcosm of the broader struggles within Silicon Valley's ruthless landscape. Emily's plan continued to evolve. She expanded her network within the household, recruiting others discontented with Jonathan's dominance. She leveraged her technical skills to access deeper layers of the company's infrastructure, gathering intelligence that would enable more strategic strikes. At the same time, she maintained the facade of the loyal, dependable Maid, a role that allowed her to operate under the radar. This balance was delicate and demanded constant vigilance. A single misstep could unravel everything, exposing her motives and putting her at risk. Yet, Emily thrived in this precarious position. Her every move was a calculated step toward reclaiming the power that had been stolen from her family. In the quiet moments between tasks, she reflected on how far she had come from the struggling daughter of a broken entrepreneur to the architect of a silent revolution within the richest man's home. Emily knew that the road ahead was fraught with danger, but she was ready. Her heart burned with determination, fueled by memories of loss and a vision of justice that went beyond personal revenge. Her smile remained serene, but behind it was a storm, a force reshaping the destiny of a man who thought he was untouchable. Jonathan Pierce was about to discover that the greatest threat to his empire was not a rival billionaire or a hostile takeover, but a quiet maid with a fierce resolve and a secret agenda. And Emily Chen was just getting started. The walls of Jonathan Pierce's corporate empire began to tremble. What had once been an unshakable fortress was now showing cracks, some subtle, others impossible to ignore. The ripple effects of the sabotage Emily Chen masterminded were no longer confined to the quiet corners of his mansion. They had spilled into the heart of his business. Within the sleek glass towers that housed Jonathan's flagship companies, the atmosphere shifted. The energy that had once been charged with confidence now buzzed with uncertainty. Employees whispered in hallways, board members exchanged worried glances, and investors began asking uncomfortable questions. Jonathan's most ambitious ventures started to falter. One of his flagship projects, a multi-billion-dollar renewable energy startup, touted as the next big thing, suffered a series of setbacks. Key contracts were inexplicably delayed, vendors pulled out, and regulatory approvals slowed to a crawl. These setbacks were more than bad luck. They were the result of carefully orchestrated disruptions, both technical and psychological, that Emily and her network executed with precision. The project's lead manager, once a staunch supporter of Jonathan, resigned unexpectedly, citing irreconcilable differences. Rumors swirled that internal leaks and miscommunication had poisoned the project's atmosphere. Stock prices reflected the turmoil. Investors reacted swiftly to news of missed deadlines and internal discord. Over the course of several weeks, the company's valuation dipped sharply, eroding billions in market capitalization. Jonathan watched these developments with growing alarm. The fortress he had built with relentless ambition was being dismantled piece by piece. But it wasn't just the business world that felt the tremors. The Pierce family itself was beginning to fracture under the strain. Victoria, Jonathan's wife, who had long maintained a stoic facade, grew increasingly distant. The tension between them became palpable, with heated arguments replaced by cold silences. Their two children, once proud heirs to the Pierce legacy, began to question their place in the family empire. The rumors circulating about their father's leadership didn't help. The younger Pierce siblings found themselves caught between loyalty and self-preservation, unsure whether to stand by Jonathan or carve independent paths. Meanwhile, the staff within the mansion were not immune to the unrest. The subtle power shifts, orchestrated by Emily, created an undercurrent of tension. Loyalties divided, with some siding with Jonathan out of fear or respect, while others gravitated toward Emily's quiet influence. Emily's ability to foster alliances among the staff proved invaluable. These alliances facilitated the subtle sabotage that continued to disrupt Jonathan's world. Her network was not large, but it was strategic, comprising individuals who felt marginalized or disillusioned by the rigid hierarchy of the Pierce household. Through whispered conversations and small acts of defiance, Emily cultivated a sense of empowerment among her allies. Together, they chipped away at the foundations of Jonathan's control. One morning, Jonathan arrived at the company headquarters to find chaos. The IT department was overwhelmed with reports of system failures, data breaches, and suspicious activity. Important files were corrupted, communications were scrambled, and project timelines were thrown into disarray. Jonathan's security team scrambled to contain the damage, but the attacks were coordinated and relentless. Emily's reach had extended deeper into the company's infrastructure than anyone had suspected. Despite the mounting crises, Jonathan refused to concede defeat. He doubled down on his efforts, bringing in external consultants, tightening security protocols, and demanding accountability from his executive team. But the internal erosion of trust made leadership difficult. The executives, once united under Jonathan's vision, now questioned his judgment and strategy. Jonathan found himself isolated not just by the sabotage, but by the doubt it seeded within his own ranks. In the midst of this turmoil, Emily's confidence grew. Her plan to destabilize Jonathan's empire was succeeding beyond her expectations. Each setback he suffered fueled her resolve. Yet, she was not reckless. She knew the importance of pacing her moves, ensuring that the impact was significant, but not so overwhelming as to provoke a swift and brutal retaliation. Emily's intelligence and strategic thinking were her greatest assets. She understood that power was not just about strength, but about timing, perception, and control of the narrative. She continued to play her role flawlessly, the dutiful maid, the trusted confidant, the silent observer. No one suspected that beneath her calm exterior was the architect of upheaval. In private moments, Emily reflected on the transformation unfolding around her. Jonathan Pierce was no longer the untouchable titan. He was a man under siege, grappling with forces he couldn't fully see. For Emily, this was validation. Her father's legacy and her own were being avenged not through brute force, but through cunning and perseverance. However, Emily also recognized that her actions carried risks beyond the business consequences. The personal toll on the Pierce family weighed on her conscience. She had seen the cracks in Jonathan's marriage, the strained relationships with his children, and the growing fear among the household staff. While her mission was justice, she could not ignore the human cost. Yet, she resolved to continue. Change often demanded sacrifice, and the price of power was never without collateral damage. As Jonathan's empire teetered on the edge, Emily prepared for the next phase of her plan. She aimed to deepen the fractures within the company, turning allies into adversaries and weakening Jonathan's grip further. The battle for control was no longer a subtle game. It had become a full-scale struggle for survival. Jonathan Pierce's world was unraveling, and at the center of the storm was the quiet maid who refused to be invisible. I've often thought about my past, about the life I left behind, and the reasons that brought me here, to the heart of Jonathan Pierce's empire. My story isn't just about revenge. It's a journey shaped by loss, resilience, and the hope for redemption. Growing up in San Francisco's Chinatown, my childhood was a mix of close-knit community warmth and harsh realities. Our neighborhood thrived with small businesses, bustling markets, and families striving for a better future. My parents worked tirelessly to provide for me and my siblings, instilling values of hard work and perseverance. My father, Michael Chen, was a man of vision and ambition. He dreamed of building a tech startup that could compete in Silicon Valley, bringing innovation and opportunity to our community. He poured every ounce of energy and hope into that dream. But Silicon Valley was unforgiving. Giants like Jonathan Pierce dominated the landscape, leaving little room for newcomers. When my father's startup showed promise, it drew unwanted attention. Jonathan's aggressive expansion and ruthless tactics swept through the industry, leaving smaller companies like my father's vulnerable. Faced with hostile takeovers and cutthroat competition, Michael's business began to crumble. I remember the day our family lost everything. The foreclosure notice on our modest home, the cold silence at the dinner table, and the fear in my mother's eyes. My father's health deteriorated under the strain, and the man who once inspired us with his dreams became a shadow of himself. That chapter of despair marked a turning point in my life. I vowed to reclaim our dignity, not through bitterness, but through determination. I focused on my education, studying business administration and computer science, equipping myself with skills to navigate the world that had taken so much from us. But education alone wasn't enough. I needed access to the inner workings of the empire that had destroyed my family. When the opportunity to join the Pierce household arose, I seized it. To outsiders, I was just a maid, a background figure. But to me, it was a strategic position from which I could observe, learn, and influence. Living within the Pierce mansion revealed a world both fascinating and flawed. The luxury and technology were dazzling, but beneath the surface were tensions, secrets, and vulnerabilities. I witnessed the pressures Jonathan faced, the weight of expectations, the isolation of power, and the fragile balance he maintained between his public persona and private struggles. I also saw cracks in the family's relationships. Victoria's quiet resignation, the children's distant gazes, and the unspoken tensions among the staff painted a picture of a household on edge. My plan unfolded slowly and carefully. I gathered information, mapped relationships, and identified weaknesses. Every detail mattered: the timing of meetings, the flow of information, the loyalties and resentments. But the mission wasn't just about gathering intel, it was about sowing doubt and discord. I subtly influenced conversations, planted seeds of mistrust, and created small disruptions that amplified existing tensions. It was a delicate dance. I had to maintain my cover, keep the household running smoothly, and never reveal my true intentions. There were moments when the weight of deception pressed heavily on me. I struggled with the ethics of my actions, questioning the line between justice and vengeance. But the memory of my family's fall and the desire to prevent others from suffering kept me focused. As the disruptions grew more impactful, from missing files to the blackout at the company dinner, the stakes escalated. Jonathan's empire wavered, and the once untouchable billionaire appeared vulnerable. Yet, beneath the chaos, I sensed a man grappling with loss and fear. His quest for control masked deeper insecurities and loneliness. This realization complicated my mission. Jonathan was not just an adversary, he was a man shaped by his own trials. I found myself reflecting on the nature of power and the cost it exacts. Control can isolate, and the pursuit of it can blind even the strongest. Living in the Pierce household taught me that influence doesn't always come from wealth or title. Sometimes it comes from quiet persistence, patience, and understanding human nature. My journey was as much about self-discovery as it was about revenge. I was redefining what it meant to be powerful, not through domination, but through resilience and strategic action. I often wondered what the future held. Would Jonathan recover and reclaim his empire? Would our paths cross in confrontation or understanding? For now, I remained committed to my purpose, navigating the complex web of relationships and power dynamics with care. Each day was a step closer to justice for my family, for myself, and for those who had been overlooked and oppressed. This was more than a mission. It was a reclamation of dignity and agency. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I walked it with determination, knowing that sometimes the quietest voices have the most profound impact. Jonathan Pierce's mind was a battlefield. Each morning, he awoke with a renewed determination to regain his lost grip on the empire he had painstakingly built. Yet every attempt to restore order seemed to push him further into chaos. The saboteur inside his household, Emily Chen, was proving to be more elusive and dangerous than he had ever imagined. Determined to take decisive action, Jonathan hired a private investigator named Mark Reynolds, a seasoned professional known for uncovering hidden truths and exposing secrets in the corporate world. Mark's reputation for discretion and efficiency made him the ideal choice for this delicate mission. Jonathan's instructions to Mark were clear: identify the source of the internal disruptions and gather irrefutable evidence to neutralize the threat once and for all. Jonathan trusted no one else with this task. The stakes were too high. Mark began his investigation with a comprehensive review of the mansion's staff and the company's inner circle. He scrutinized communication logs, security footage, and employee records. His team conducted discreet interviews, probing for inconsistencies and signs of disloyalty. The challenge was immense. The saboteur had covered their tracks expertly, leaving few clues and weaving a complex web of deception. Yet, Mark's experience allowed him to detect subtle patterns others had missed. He noticed inconsistencies in the timing of security glitches, unexplained absences during critical incidents, and minor but telling behavioral changes among certain staff members. His attention soon focused on Emily Chen. Her role as maid gave her unparalleled access to the household and the company's private spaces. Despite her unassuming demeanor, she was always present where key disruptions occurred. Her calmness during crises seemed almost rehearsed. Jonathan was reluctant to believe that Emily, who had become a trusted presence, could be the mastermind behind the sabotage. But the mounting evidence was hard to ignore. Mark proceeded with caution, shadowing Emily's movements and analyzing her interactions. He discovered that Emily often communicated discreetly with other staff members, suggesting the existence of a coordinated effort rather than isolated acts. At one point, Mark obtained footage of Emily accessing a restricted area in the mansion late at night, a location containing sensitive corporate documents and server controls. Her actions were deliberate, measured, and clandestine. When Mark presented his findings to Jonathan, the billionaire felt a complex mix of betrayal and resolve. The woman he had overlooked and underestimated was the very force destabilizing his empire. With the evidence in hand, Jonathan planned to confront Emily, but he understood that a direct accusation without a strategic approach could backfire. Emily was clever and resourceful. She would not yield easily. Instead, Jonathan devised a multi-layered strategy to regain control. First, he tightened security protocols, restricting access to sensitive areas and increasing surveillance. He implemented biometric authentication systems and enhanced network defenses. Second, Jonathan began to sow distrust within Emily's network, planting misinformation to fracture their alliance. He knew that by turning her allies against her, he could weaken her influence. Third, Jonathan sought to understand Emily's motives. He delved deeper into her background, uncovering the history of her family's downfall and the personal vendetta driving her actions. This understanding did not diminish his anger, but added a layer of complexity to the conflict. Emily was not merely a saboteur. She was a woman seeking justice in a system that had wronged her. Jonathan's next move was psychological. He started engaging Emily indirectly, sending subtle messages that he knew would reach her through staff whispers, coded notes, and carefully leaked information. He aimed to unsettle her, making her question her safety and the loyalty of her allies. The game had shifted from mere sabotage to a high-stakes battle of wills. Meanwhile, Emily sensed the changing tides. The walls around her were closing in, and Jonathan was no longer a passive target. He was fighting back with a vigor and intelligence that demanded respect. She tightened her own defenses, vetting her network more carefully and increasing operational security. The stakes were higher than ever, and mistakes could be fatal. Their silent war escalated into a complex dance of strategy and counter-strategy, each anticipating the other's moves with precision. For Jonathan, the confrontation with Emily was not just about protecting his empire, but reclaiming his identity as a leader and a man. For Emily, it was a fight for justice and survival in a world stacked against her. The lines between enemy and adversary blurred as both recognized the other's strength and resolve. In this high-stakes game of power and influence, only one could emerge victorious, but neither would back down without a fight. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation that would test their limits and redefine the meaning of control. Jonathan Pierce and Emily Chen were locked in a battle that transcended their personal histories, a battle that would shape the future of their lives and legacies. And the world was watching. The night of Jonathan Pierce's 57th birthday was meant to be a grand celebration, a dazzling gala hosted in his expansive mansion, perched atop the hills of San Francisco, overlooking the shimmering city lights. Invitations had been sent to a carefully curated list of influential business leaders, high-profile investors, and close friends. The event was not only a personal milestone, but a testament to Jonathan's enduring power and status within Silicon Valley's elite. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was electric. Waiters in crisp tuxedos glided through the crowd, champagne flutes tinkled, and the sound of soft jazz floated through the grand ballroom. Guests mingled beneath ornate chandeliers, their conversations a blend of business negotiations and polite pleasantries. Jonathan himself, dressed in a tailored midnight blue suit, radiated confidence as he greeted his guests with firm handshakes and carefully measured smiles. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Jonathan was painfully aware of the turmoil threatening his empire, the recent setbacks, the leaks, the growing suspicion within his own household. Yet tonight, he resolved to present an image of control and strength. This night was to be a declaration that despite the storms, he remained unshaken. Emily Chen moved silently through the crowd, her role as maid momentarily set aside as she ensured the event ran seamlessly. To the guests, she was a discreet presence, efficient and unobtrusive. But to herself, the gala was another opportunity to advance her plan, to remind Jonathan that his empire was far from invincible. The evening unfolded as planned until the moment Jonathan stepped onto the stage to deliver his keynote speech, announcing a new strategic partnership that would secure the future of his renewable energy venture. As the spotlight focused on him and the orchestra swelled softly in the background, the mansion suddenly plunged into darkness. The grand chandelier flickered and went out, leaving the room bathed only in the emergency exit light's dim red glow. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as guests instinctively reached for their phones, illuminating the space with an eerie glow. Jonathan's initial surprise quickly gave way to composure. He raised a hand, signaling for calm, and attempted to continue his speech, but the microphone crackled and died. The sound system had been sabotaged. Behind the scenes, the security team scrambled to identify the cause of the blackout. It soon became clear. The mansion's main power supply had been deliberately cut. The blackout lasted 15 agonizing minutes, a lifetime in the high-stakes world of investor confidence. By the time power was restored, the atmosphere had shifted. The carefully crafted illusion of control was fractured, replaced by whispers of uncertainty and doubt. News of the blackout spread rapidly. Social media buzzed with speculation and insider accounts. News outlets pounced on the story, framing it as a symbol of instability within Jonathan Pierce's empire. But the blackout was only the beginning. Within hours, confidential internal documents, financial projections, strategic plans, and private correspondence were leaked to the press. The timing was impeccable, amplifying the damage caused by the blackout. Stock prices plummeted as investors reacted to the scandal. Analysts questioned the company's leadership, and competitors seized the opportunity to challenge Jonathan's dominance. Inside the mansion, the mood darkened. Jonathan's family, staff, and closest advisors grappled with the fallout. Victoria retreated further into herself, while his children exchanged worried glances, their faith in their father's empire shaken. Jonathan himself was resolute, but visibly strained. The public spectacle had exposed vulnerabilities he had fought so hard to conceal. The board convened an emergency meeting. Jonathan addressed the concerns head-on, promising swift action and reinforcing his commitment to restoring stability. Yet privately, he knew the source of the crisis was closer than anyone suspected. Emily Chen had orchestrated the blackout and the leaks, striking at the core of Jonathan's power. Her knowledge of the mansion's infrastructure and her network within the household enabled her to execute the plan flawlessly. For Emily, the blackout was a calculated escalation, a bold statement that Jonathan's reign was under siege. It was a message not just to Jonathan, but to the world that the unassailable could fall. She watched from the sidelines as chaos unfolded, her heart pounding with a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. She understood the risks if caught, the consequences would be severe. Yet, the potential to dismantle the empire that had destroyed her family outweighed the danger. In the days that followed, Jonathan intensified his efforts to root out the saboteurs. Security measures were ramped up, and surveillance became omnipresent. Employees and household staff faced increased scrutiny, and trust grew scarcer. Emily tightened her defenses, aware that the stakes had never been higher. She continued to operate with precision, avoiding detection while pushing forward with her plan. The blackout incident marked a turning point. Jonathan's empire was no longer simply challenged, it was in open crisis. The battle for control had escalated beyond whispered sabotage into a full-scale confrontation. Yet, despite the turmoil, both Jonathan and Emily recognized an unspoken truth. Their conflict was more than a power struggle. It was a collision of past wounds, personal vendettas, and the complex dynamics of control and vulnerability. Jonathan Pierce, the titan of Silicon Valley, faced a reckoning that tested not only his business acumen, but his very identity. And Emily Chen, the quiet maid with a fierce resolve, was poised to redefine the rules of the game. The blackout was a stark reminder that in the world of power, No fortress is impregnable. The question now was who would emerge from the darkness victorious. With the blackout behind them and the fallout still reverberating through every corner of Jonathan Pierce's empire, Emily Chen knew it was time to escalate her plan. The subtle disruptions had shaken the foundations, but now she needed to go deeper, to fracture the very alliances that held Jonathan's world together. Jonathan's power was not just built on his wealth or business acumen. It was anchored by a close-knit circle of trusted allies, executives, board members, and longtime family confidants. These were the people who managed his companies, advised his decisions, and shielded him from many external threats. If Emily could isolate Jonathan by turning his allies against him, she could effectively dismantle his empire from the inside out. Her first target was the executive team. Through carefully planted doubts and whispered rumors, Emily seeded mistrust among the highest echelons of the company. She exploited existing rivalries and ambitions, fanning the flames of discord where tensions already simmered beneath the surface. Emily's network within the mansion proved invaluable. Staff members, who once were merely silent observers, became active participants in her plan. They relayed conversations, shared observations, and passed along subtle messages designed to sow confusion. One executive in particular, Richard Myers, the company's CFO and longtime ally of Jonathan, became a focal point. Richard was known for his meticulous nature and unwavering loyalty, but even he was not immune to the carefully orchestrated doubts. Anonymous tips suggested that Richard's decisions had been compromised, hinting at conflicts of interest and secret dealings. Internal emails, doctored and leaked, fueled suspicion about his allegiance. Emily's influence extended beyond corporate corridors into Jonathan's personal circle as well. She subtly manipulated the social dynamics within the family and household staff, creating rifts and eroding trust. Victoria, Jonathan's wife, became distant and guarded, increasingly wary of those around her. Jonathan's children, sensing the instability, began to question their own loyalties and futures. These fractures were not created overnight. They were the result of months of careful planning, patience, and precision. Emily understood that to truly dismantle a titan, she had to attack the pillars supporting him, not just the man himself. Jonathan, meanwhile, was not blind to these growing divisions. He noticed the shifting allegiances and the whisper campaigns circulating within his inner circle. But his attempts to address these fractures were often met with guarded responses or outright denial. The erosion of trust became a self-fulfilling prophecy. As suspicion spread, communication broke down, decisions stalled, and the company's agility diminished. Stockholders grew anxious. Investors demanded transparency and leadership. The media, sensing weakness, amplified the narrative of internal chaos. Jonathan faced pressure from all sides, and his authority was increasingly questioned. Amidst this turmoil, Emily maintained her calm and discretion. She was careful to remain above suspicion, playing the role of the loyal maid who kept the household running smoothly. Her ability to walk this tightrope was a testament to her intelligence and emotional control. She knew that the moment her true motives were revealed, her entire plan would collapse. Beyond the corporate battlefield, Emily also confronted personal challenges. The toll of living a double life weighed heavily. She navigated the fine line between friend and foe, confidence and fear. The human cost of her actions became more apparent as she witnessed the strain on Jonathan's family and staff. While her mission was rooted in justice, she couldn't ignore the collateral damage. Yet, the cause remained just in her eyes. The empire she was dismantling had destroyed her family, and the pain fueled her resolve. Jonathan, sensing the growing threat, attempted to consolidate power. He replaced some executives, tightened oversight, and increased surveillance. But these measures were reactive, unable to fully counter the nuanced and covert nature of Emily's campaign. As the company's internal conflicts intensified, the battle between Jonathan and Emily evolved into a war of influence, fought not with weapons or lawsuits, but with information, perception, and alliances. Their confrontation was no longer simply about control. It was a test of endurance, strategy, and will. Emily's plan to isolate Jonathan was succeeding, but she knew the fight was far from over. Jonathan Pierce was a formidable adversary, resilient, resourceful, and unwilling to surrender. The coming months would determine the fate of the empire and the lives entwined within it. And at the center of this storm stood Emily Chen, quietly orchestrating the fall of a titan, one calculated move at a time. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, when the mansion was still and the world outside seemed distant, I found myself wrestling with the weight of what I had become. I would sit alone in the staff quarters, staring at the pale glow of the city lights through the narrow window, and feel the surge of conflicting emotions inside me: resolve, guilt, doubt, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. I am Emily Chen. To the world, a devoted maid silently working within the Grand Pierce estate. But beneath the surface, I am a storm, a force driven by memories of loss, a burning desire for justice, and an unyielding resolve to dismantle the empire that shattered my family. I often wonder how much of myself I have lost in this fight. The path I chose was never easy, and with each calculated move, the lines between right and wrong blurred further. At times, I question whether the collateral damage I have caused is justified. The fractures in Jonathan's family, the growing tension among the staff, and the chaos engulfing his company. These are not abstract concepts to me. They are real, living consequences of my actions. There are nights when I hear the muffled sobs of Victoria, the stoic wife, hidden behind closed doors. I imagine the children, caught between loyalty to their father and the growing uncertainty surrounding their family legacy. I think of the loyal staff, torn between duty and fear. I did not set out to be a harbinger of pain, yet pain has become intertwined with every step I take. My role requires me to be a chameleon, adapting, concealing, and navigating a world that is not my own. It is exhausting to wear the mask of loyalty and servitude while harboring a secret mission that could destroy everything around me. Yet, the memory of my father's downfall propels me forward. I see in Jonathan the man responsible for stealing not only our wealth, but our dignity and dreams. My actions are a reckoning, a reclamation of power in a world that often favors the privileged. Still, I am not immune to self-doubt. The moral ambiguity of my quest weighs heavily. Is my pursuit justice or revenge? Am I restoring balance or perpetuating a cycle of destruction? These questions haunt me, but they do not deter me. I have learned that power is a double-edged sword. It can heal or harm, build or destroy. Control is not simply about dominance. It is about understanding, influence, and the courage to face consequences. In the quiet moments, I allow myself to reflect on the complexities of human nature, the fragility behind strength, the vulnerability masked by authority. Jonathan Pierce is not just a target. He is a man shaped by his own fears and desires, trapped in a world where every decision carries weight and consequence. Our conflict is more than a battle of wills. It is a mirror reflecting the struggles of power, justice, and identity. Despite the turmoil, I strive to hold on to my humanity. I reach out in small ways to the staff who confide in me, to moments of kindness that break through the tension. These connections remind me that beneath the schemes and shadows, we are all searching for dignity and respect. As I continue to navigate this intricate web of deception and influence, I am mindful of the cost and the stakes. The road ahead is uncertain and fraught with peril. Yet, I am resolved to see this through not just for myself, but for those who have been silenced and overlooked. In this journey, I have discovered strength I never knew I had, and a voice that refuses to be quieted. And though the battle is far from over, I carry hope that in the end, justice and truth will prevail. Jonathan Pierce sat alone in his sprawling study, the weight of recent months pressing heavily on his shoulders. The man who once stood atop Silicon Valley's summit now felt the chill of uncertainty creeping into his bones. The relentless disruptions, the leaks, the betrayals. It was a storm unlike any he'd faced before. Yet, amidst the chaos, a new clarity was beginning to form in his mind, a realization that his old ways were no longer enough. For decades, Jonathan had ruled his empire with an iron fist, cloaked in precision and control. He had mastered the art of negotiation, the dance of power and influence. But now, he understood that power without trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered by internal strife. His recent battles had exposed weaknesses not just in his security systems or corporate structures, but in the very way he related to those around him. His relationships, once transactional and distant, needed rebuilding. The walls he had built to protect himself had isolated him, making him vulnerable. The first step in his awakening was accepting that he could no longer govern through fear and intimidation alone. He needed transparency, communication, and genuine connection. He had to rebuild the trust that had eroded not just with his executives and staff, but within his family. Jonathan began by reaching out to his closest advisors, admitting openly the challenges they faced, and asking for their counsel. This was a departure from his usual command and control approach, but it was necessary. Together, they devised a plan to foster collaboration and accountability. In his family, Jonathan sought reconciliation. He apologized to Victoria for his emotional absence, acknowledging the strain his ambition had placed on their marriage. He invited his children into more meaningful conversations about the future, seeking their input and reassurance. At the company, Jonathan championed a culture shift. He encouraged openness, embraced feedback, and worked to dismantle the silos that had bred suspicion and inefficiency. He invested in leadership training, emphasizing empathy and ethical decision-making. This transformation was neither quick nor easy. Old habits die hard, and Jonathan faced resistance from those accustomed to the old ways. Yet, his determination was unwavering. In parallel, Jonathan intensified efforts to regain control over the ongoing sabotage. With his security team and private investigators, he tightened surveillance and implemented new protocols designed to detect and prevent insider threats. He also reached out to Emily Chen indirectly, seeking to understand her motives without direct confrontation. Through intermediaries, he conveyed a willingness to listen and a desire to find common ground. This gesture was part strategy, part genuine curiosity. Jonathan recognized that Emily was not merely an enemy, but a person shaped by pain and injustice. Engaging with her on this level could potentially diffuse the conflict or at least bring clarity. Jonathan's awakening extended beyond strategy to introspection. He reflected on the nature of power and control, how his relentless pursuit had shaped his identity and alienated those closest to him. He grappled with questions about legacy, purpose, and the true meaning of success. One evening, as he reviewed company reports and security updates, Jonathan paused to consider his journey. He realized that regaining control was about more than restoring order. It was about transformation. He understood that to rebuild his empire, he had to rebuild himself. This realization infused Jonathan with renewed energy and hope. The path ahead remained challenging, but he embraced it with humility and resolve. Jonathan Pierce's story was entering a new chapter, one defined not by domination, but by growth, connection, and resilience. As he prepared for the inevitable confrontation with Emily Chen, he did so not only as a businessman, but as a man seeking redemption and understanding. The battle for control was far from over, but Jonathan was ready to face it with a new perspective. And in this awakening lay the seeds of change that could alter the course of his empire and his life forever. The night was thick with anticipation as Jonathan Pierce stepped into the grand study where the final confrontation was to unfold. The mansion, which had been his fortress for decades, now felt like the stage of a long-awaited reckoning. The air was charged with tension, the silence punctuated only by the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall. This was no ordinary encounter. It was a collision of two worlds, two wills, and two souls, intertwined by conflict and fate. Emily Chen stood by the window, her figure silhouetted against the glowing cityscape. Calm and composed, she turned slowly as Jonathan entered, her eyes reflecting a mix of determination and weary resolve. The years of planning, the countless small moves and counter-moves, had all led to this moment. Neither was the person they had been when this struggle began. Jonathan's voice broke the silence first. "Emily, it doesn't have to end like this. We can find a way forward, one that doesn't destroy everything we fought for." Emily's lips curled into a faint, almost sad smile. "You speak of fighting for what we've built, but your empire was built on the ruins of my family's dreams. Justice, to me, isn't destruction, it's accountability." The air grew heavier as the two faced each other, their shared history etched into every word and gesture. Jonathan took a step forward, his tone softer but firm. "I understand your pain. I've had to confront my own failures and the cost of my ambition. But tearing down everything won't heal the wounds. We have to rebuild together if possible." Emily's eyes searched his, looking for sincerity, for a sign that this was more than just strategy. Why should I believe you? Why should I trust the man who lost sight of the people behind the power? Jonathan paused, the weight of his past actions settling over him. Because I'm no longer that man. I'm trying to change, not just for myself, but for everyone affected. The room seemed to hold its breath. Two adversaries, bound by pain and purpose, stood at a crossroads. Emily spoke slowly, her voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. I came here to reclaim what was stolen, but along the way I've realized that vengeance isn't enough. We both have to face the consequences of our choices, of our failures. Jonathan nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. Then let's face them, together. The tension softened as they reached a fragile understanding. It wasn't forgiveness not yet, but the first step towards something new. Their dialogue continued deep into the night, weaving through memories, regrets, hopes, and fears. They spoke of the empire, the family, the staff, and the future. In this exchange, walls began to crumble, and empathy emerged. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars, bearing witness to a moment of reckoning and reconciliation. By dawn, a plan had begun to take shape, a plan that would address the wounds of the past while forging a path forward. Jonathan and Emily, once adversaries locked in silent war, now stood as reluctant partners in a journey of restoration. Their battle for control had transformed into a shared quest for healing. The outcome was uncertain, but the courage to confront their demons was undeniable. As the first light of morning crept through the windows, a new chapter began not just for Jonathan Pierce and Emily Chen, but for all those touched by their story. In the days and weeks that followed their intense confrontation, the world watched as Jonathan Pierce and Emily Chen embarked on a journey neither had anticipated. What began as a battle of wills had evolved into an uneasy partnership, a fragile alliance forged in the crucible of conflict and understanding. The aftermath was complex. Jonathan's empire, once shaken to its core, began to stabilize not through force alone, but through transparency and collaboration. He took bold steps to rebuild trust within his company and family, acknowledging past mistakes and committing to a new leadership style grounded in empathy and accountability. Emily, no longer just the silent disruptor, emerged as a voice for change. Her role within the household and company expanded, not as a saboteur, but as an advocate for fairness and integrity. The staff she once quietly rallied now saw her as a leader, someone who bridged the gap between the powerful and the overlooked. The transformation was not without its challenges. Old wounds lingered and skepticism remained. Some shareholders doubted the sincerity of the new direction, while family members struggled to reconcile with the past. Yet, the momentum was undeniable. Together, Jonathan and Emily spearheaded initiatives aimed at corporate social responsibility, employee empowerment, and community engagement. They fostered open forums for dialogue, encouraged diversity of thought, and implemented transparent governance structures. Beyond the boardrooms and business strategies, their personal journeys intertwined. Jonathan confronted the emotional barriers that had long isolated him, while Emily discovered the strength to let go of bitterness and embrace healing. Their story became a testament to the power of vulnerability and the possibility of redemption. In Silicon Valley and beyond, their experience sparked conversations about the true nature of power, leadership, and justice. It challenged the notion that control must come at the expense of empathy, showing instead that sustainable influence arises from trust and mutual respect. The lessons were profound. Success was not merely measured in profits or dominance, but in the impact on people's lives and the legacy left behind. Jonathan Pierce and Emily Chen's saga was a microcosm of a broader truth, that even the most entrenched conflicts can find resolution when individuals dare to confront their fears and embrace change. As they stood together at the company's annual meeting months later, addressing a crowd that once viewed them as adversaries, there was a palpable sense of hope and renewal. Their story was no longer one of division and sabotage, but of unity and transformation. The richest billionaire in the region and the once invisible Maid had rewritten the narrative, showing that true power lies not in control, but in connection. And in that connection, they found a future worth fighting for. And so, as our story gently comes to a close, remember that every journey, no matter how grand or humble, carries its own lessons and moments of quiet strength. Success isn't just about the numbers or the spotlight, it's about the resilience found in the small, everyday choices. Sometimes, the greatest victories are the ones we achieve within ourselves. If you've enjoyed this story, I'd love for you to hit that like button and subscribe to Stories TH so we can share many more inspiring tales together. Also, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always find that so fascinating. Take a deep breath, feel the calm, and carry this sense of hope with you as you move forward. Life's twists and turns don't define us. Our courage to keep going does. Thanks for spending this time with me. Until next time, take care and remember you're never alone in this. Whispering softly. See you soon.